Welcome. You're here. Now, the noise of your day has grown distant. The light has softened, and the world of now has gently faded, giving way to the muted echo of another time. But to the hushed, candlelit corridors of a cold stone castle, tucked deep in the highlands of 16th century Hungary, a time when superstition nestled beside scripture, when noble women wore velvet gowns stitched with silver thread, and when power often hid behind iron doors and thick tapestries. Tonight, we travel not to the roar of a battlefield or the clamor of revolution. This is not a horror story, not in the way you might expect. It is the slow unraveling of a legend, part myth, part memory, built around one of history's most enigmatic figures, Countess Elizabeth, or seen it inscribed beside her macabre moniker, the Blood Countess. You may have heard the name whispered like a curse. Will walk beside the servants, the stable boy, and the kitchen girls who tended fires and fetched water, scarcely aware of the shadows that history would later cast upon their mistress. But tonight, we will take a gentler route, a slower descent, with the rhythm of their lives. We'll begin not with the infamous accusations, but with the quiet rhythms of daily life inside a Hungarian noble estate. The first to stir were the scullery maids and kitchen servants. You might imagine them now young girls with raw hands, carrying heavy buckets from the well, their shoes damp with morning frost. The kitchens, carved partially into the stone foundation, smelled of damp ash, pickled cabbage, and stale beer. A thin fire was kept overnight, and they would coax it back to life with dry twigs and breath. So imagine yourself wrapped in a warm cloak. Chambermaids brought in warmed water for washing. A gentle knock at the wooden door, the quiet rustle of linen. Peasants rose with the sun, tilling rocky soil, tending pigs and goats, and praying for mild winters, not as victims, not yet, but as hands and eyes and ears for her great estate. They swept the corridors, pressed her gowns, and stood silently behind her during morning prayers. Taxes were collected in grain, wool, and sometimes the labor of sons and daughters sent to serve in the household of the nobility. In Elizabeth's time, personal hygiene was limited to the practical rinsing hands, face, and sometimes a perfumed cloth rubbed gently over the arms and neck. Hot baths were rare luxuries, reserved for illness or ritual, with embroidered cloths laid on altars and candles lit for saints, with illness managed through poultices and whispered charms, with long winters, where the air hung heavy with the smell of boiled roots and damp stone. She was a wife, a landowner, a patron of the church, educated, powerful, precise. The air is cool, tinged with wood smoke and the breath of horses. This symmetry of quiet labor and noble control, that our story truly begins. Each step and task carried the weight of hierarchy, tradition, and quiet fear. Looming presence atop a limestone hillets, pale walls blending with the cloudy skies of Upper Hungary, and scribes might dine on black bread, lentils, and cabbage soup, served with thin ale. Salted meat was precious and rationed, and the preservation of food for winter required constant attention. Smoking. The castle's lower chambers were devoted to storage, barrels of grain, root vegetables nestled in cool straw, and rows of bottled cherry wine aging in the gloom. From afar, it was a modest stronghold compared to the grand courts of Western Europe. But here, in the rural borderlands of the Habsburg monarchy, it was a symbol of great power. Her table would be set with pewter and silver, though never quite so ostentatious as the courts of Vienna. Hungarian nobles preferred a colder, elegant ornate, but solemn. A bell tolls faintly in the distance, calling servants to the chapel. The castle stones are damp underfoot. Let us begin our journey. Segment 1. The world of the castle. Daily life in Cactus, the Countess's castle. Cactus stood not as a fairy tale fortress, but as a solid life within its walls, moved with slow, deliberate repetition, not hurried, not still, but caught in the steady cycle of medieval routine. Each morning began before the sun could rise above the hills. Above them, in the upper chambers, the noble household awoke in layers. Imagine now the halls, dim, the air cool. Tapestries hung to block winter draughts, servants' footsteps muffled on worn rugs. Meals were simple for most. The castle's residents not the nobility, but the tailors, falconers, nobles, however, experienced another world. Elizabeth, raised in refinement, would have dined on roast pheasant, sweetened cheese dumplings, and mulled wine scented with cloves and cinnamon, exotic flavors brought by merchants from distant lands. Outside the castle, the villages that fed Countess labored under the weight of seasons. It was through these rhythms, the daily needs of land and castle, that young women came to serve the Countess. Elizabeth herself was not yet the shadowed legend she would become. And so, the rhythm of their lives continued, with the toll of bells, the passing of feast days, the careful preparation for Lent. Through it all, the Countess moved like a ghost in her own hall's regal restrained, watching. It is here, in this stillness. Shall we continue? Imagine now a different room in the castle, high above the kitchens and storerooms, beyond the reach of cold draughts. Behind a heavy oak door carved with Hungarian patterns, the air smells faintly of beeswax, parchment, and lavender. Elizabeth came from one of the most powerful Protestant families in Hungary. She was taught to speak Latin, German, Hungarian, and Greek, an impressive education even among the aristocracy. Their union was more than a marriage, it was a merger of land, armies, and influence. She moved to his castle at Savoy, where she began her life as lady of the house. Her tutors schooled her in estate management, theology, and the harsh realities of governance. Discipline was strict, obedience expected. Her lineage included bishops, judges, and warriors, men and women alike, accustomed to command, calculation, and survival. Leaving Elizabeth a widow at age 44. With his death, the structure around her began to thin. She no longer answered to her husband. Her lands, over 17 villages and multiple estates, remained under her control. In this quiet chamber, we begin to trace the life of Elizabeth, not as the legend, but as the woman she once was. She was born in 1560, in a time when noble blood flowed like currency, accounted for and protected through carefully arranged marriages. From the very beginning, her world was shaped not by innocence, but by expectation. At the age of 13, she was betrothed to Ferenc, a prominent nobleman from an equally powerful family. She continued to oversee her lands, host nobles, and attend religious functions. Elizabeth's letters from this time, those that survive, showed a composed and capable woman. It was said she had tortured and killed dozens, perhaps hundreds, of young women in her castle. Tales swirled of needles, of confinement, of icy water and burning irons, and, most enduringly, of blood. She wrote of legal disputes, tenant complaints, crop issues, and debt collections. It is said that he taught Elizabeth how to punish disobedient servants, how to strike fear, how to rule not with affection, but with order. She signed contracts. She settled minor feuds. She inspected storehouses and reviewed supply lists. Much of the testimony came from servants, some under torture, others likely under pressure. The records of the so-called trial are vast, but not entirely reliable. When her husband was away at war, she ruled in his stead with efficiency and intelligence. His man, Giorgi, raided her castle on a cold winter's night. She was never formally tried. Her nobility protected her from the courts. But over the next 4 years, she remained confined to a small set of rooms, her windows bricked shut. She died in 1614, at the age of 54. Ferenc himself was a soldier, a brutal and celebrated one. Tales of his cruelty toward Ottoman prisoners echo in the darker corners of Hungarian military law. Whether this influence grew into obsession or whether the seeds were already planted is something history cannot say with certainty. What we know is that Ferenc died in 1604, likely from illness. Is that she lived, ruled, and died in a world where cruelty was common, and silence even more so. And it is here, in the years after his death, that whispers began to surface. Servant girls disappeared. Peasant families wept at locked gates. Rumors passed through kitchens, through church pews, through the marketplaces of nearby towns. But for years, no one moved against her. Elizabeth was she had friends in high places, relatives in the courts, allies in the church, and debts owed to her by the crown. Even as the stories grew darker, by 1610, the rumors had reached a level that could no longer be ignored, that she bathed in it, that she believed it would keep her young. There is no conclusive evidence that these particular acts occurred. What we know is that King Matthias of Hungary, to whom Elizabeth's family was heavily indebted, ordered an investigation. They found her there, calmly seated. The exact scene is debated, embellished, reimagined, but what followed was clear. Elizabeth was placed under house arrest. Her name would become legend, a name wrapped in blood and shadow. But the truth, as with many historical figures, is both simpler and more haunting. Was she a predator or a pawn in a political game? A woman shaped by violence and power, or a scapegoat for debts, for misogyny, for the fear of a noblewoman who knew too much and held too much? We cannot know for sure. What we can know, let us now step back away from her personal story and explore the broader world that surrounded her, a world of mystery, superstition, and strange beliefs. The shadowed tapestry of early modern Central Europe awaits. Let us leave the castle walls for a while. Step softly now into the world beyond, into the dark pine forests, the fog-choked valleys, and the little villages nestled like secrets beneath the Carpathian peaks. Here, in the early 1600s, the world was not governed solely by law or scripture. It was shaped by something far older, by beliefs, whispers, and the unseen. The people of the Hungarian highlands, especially the peasantry, lived close to the land. Their lives moved in rhythm with the sun, the seasons, and the will of spirits. In the long winters, when the snow lay deep and the wolves came closer to the edges of villages, stories grew like ivy across the walls of memory. They believed in witches, who cursed crops and summoned storms, in forest beings, who lured travelers astray with lights or laughter, and in blood drinkers, not quite vampires. Not yet, but something older, something darker. These figures were not named vampires at the time. The word would come later, filtered through Slavic tongues and Western fears. But already, there were tales of strigoi and more restless dead who rose at night to drain life from the living, a herd of goats that refused to feed. These things were not accidents, but signs. The veil between the living and the dead, between natural and unnatural, was always thin. Illnesses that spread unseen were often blamed on the touch of the undead. A child who wasted away, a mother who withered after childbirth. In others, the blood of animals was thought to grant vitality or strength. While most people would never dream of bathing in blood, the symbolic importance of it cannot be overstated. And in this landscape foggy fertile, full of hidden places, it was easy for fear to root itself deeply. If a girl vanished without word and her family was left without dowry or justice, the natural explanation would be entwined with the supernatural. But they draw from the well of belief that already existed. A noblewoman accused of unnatural practices during a time when the border between sin and sorcery was perilously thin, became the perfect subject for monstrous legend. Blood, too, held meaning beyond the physical. It was life, yes, but it was also power. In some traditions, a drop of blood was added to bread dough to ward off illness. From there, it grew fed by Gothic novels, stage plays, and eventually the rise of the vampire myth itself. But while his legend was built on political resistance and battlefield horror, hers was deeply gender-rooted in beauty, vanity, and forbidden desire. To the peasantry, a noble woman distant, unreachable, sometimes cruel, already existed in a different world. If animals sickened after delivering daughters to the castle, no contemporary account mentions her bathing in blood. The castle of Countess, perched so high and so isolated, became the perfect vessel for fear. It was said the stones bled in the rain, that screams could be heard in the night wind, that the Countess kept mirrors covered, so as not to see what her soul had become. Of course, many of these are later inventions, details painted on by poets, playwrights, and but to the quiet where the world of noblewomen and peasants intersected, and where power, as always, wore many masks. In the decades after her death, Elizabeth's story spread. It traveled beyond Hungary and Slovakia, into the salons of Vienna and the libraries of Germany. Her name became entangled with tales of immortality, of forbidden rituals, of eternal youth purchased with suffering. And yet, that detail would not appear until over a century later, in a sensationalized book by a Jesuit scholar. By the 19th century, Elizabeth had become Countess Dracula, female echo of the infamous Vlad the Impaler. The idea of a woman preserving youth through death was titillating, terrifying, and, to some, disturbingly plausible. It is worth pausing here to consider how much of what we think we know is built not on fact, but on fear, not on evidence, but on echoes. History remembers what is repeated, and sometimes the whisper is louder than the scream. As the candle burns lower and the night deepens, we return now to the castle, not to the legends. Let us gently shift once more, and explore the contrasts of life in Elizabeth's world between the voiceless and the celebrated, the lowborn and the elite. As the wind curls softly around the stone towers of Countess Castle, let us take one final walk through the contrast that defined Elizabeth's world. In 16th and early 17th century Hungary, the divide between noble and peasant was not simply a matter of wealth, it was a matter of existence. The way one walked, spoke, ate, dressed, even the way one prayed was shaped by class. Imagine the village below the castle first, humble homes of timber and clay, their thatched roofs uneven, patched with straw and mud. The single-room interiors were smoky in winter, when fires were lit without chimneys, and cool and damp in spring, when rain trickled through the seams. Meat was rare, except for holidays or when a family pig was slaughtered. Sometimes they helped, sometimes they didn't. Superstition was both comfort and explanation. Their knowledge came through oral traditions, songs, stories, sermons passed down around fires, remembered and reshaped with each telling. Hunger was a familiar companion. In lean years, survival meant foraging, bartering, and going without. Floors were dirt, packed firm with ash and time. Chickens wandered in and out. Children slept on benches, bundled in coarse wool. Meals were basic: porridge, black bread, maybe a bit of onion or beans. A single scandal could shatter a family's standing. Alliances were made and broken through marriage, debt, and rumor. Elizabeth lived in a constant web of correspondence, negotiation, and calculation. Others were drawn from the countryside, brought into the castle to serve as maids, tailors, cooks, guards. A few rose, most did not. Disposable, unseen. Their disappearances noted only in passing, if at all. Her wealth had to be defended, her alliances maintained. Every gesture, every silence had meaning. She drank wine from polished goblets and wrote letters in Latin with iron gall ink. Discipline was expected, punishment accepted. The idea that a noblewoman could harm a servant girl and face consequences was almost laughable until Elizabeth, through politics or cruelty or fate, crossed an invisible line. Her meals were cooked by trained staff. Her entertainment included musicians, falconers, foreign visitors, and books bound in leather. She prayed in private chapels, beneath painted ceilings. Even in mourning, she wore finely woven black. She bathed, when she chose to, in perfumed water. Her linen cloths hand-stitched by servants who would never dream of touching the items they laundered. There were no doctors in these villages, only wise women and traveling healers, often older widows, who mixed herbs and murmured ancient prayers. Education was scarce. Most peasants could not read. Now climb the hill again, back to the castle. Inside its thick walls, the nobility lived in a world that must have seemed enchanted by comparison. She was buried, eventually, without ceremony, in secret. Elizabeth owned dozens of dresses, imported silks, and furs trimmed with sable and fox. Her rooms were heated with large tiled stoves, but with privilege came burden and paranoia. Nobility in this age was fragile, and beneath her, the lives of those who served. Some were born into noble houses, lower in rank but still protected by name. It was from this lower tier that the girls came, the ones later named in the accusations. They were not guests, they were workers. Even before the accusations, violence from nobles toward servants was rarely questioned. What that line truly was remains uncertain. Perhaps it was her gender, a woman with too much power. Perhaps it was her debt. The king owed her family money. Perhaps it was envy, fear, or simply a need for control in an unstable time. And the kitchen girl stoking the fire below, her hands rough, her song unfinished. Whatever the reason, the wall of protection that had long separated her from consequences finally cracked. Even then, her punishment was mild by common standards. She was confined, not executed. And yet, her name endured. The peasant girls who vanished, their names are gone, their stories lost to the mist. Only the Countess remains. History is cruel in that way. It remembers those with title and scandal. It forgets those who served, who suffered, who survived. So as we sit now, centuries later, in the comfort of the present, let us remember the quiet rhythm of both lives. The noblewoman at her writing desk, surrounded by wax and parchment. Both belonged to the same world, but they lived in entirely different realms. And so we come to the end of our journey, not with blood or fear, but with silence. Now the fire has burned low. The corridors are quiet. The whispers of the past fade gently, like footsteps receding down a long, empty hall. Elizabeth remains a figure between worlds, between truth and legend, cruelty and rumor, woman and myth. She was not the first to be feared, and she would not be the last. History is full of shadows like hers, half remembered, misunderstood, reshaped by time and imagination. But tonight, there is no need to unravel it further. Let the candlelight dim, let the weight of the past rest where it belongs, and let the rhythm of their lives, distant and soft, lull you to sleep. You are safe now, far from Cactus's cold towers. The only sound is your own breath. The only journey left is inward, into dreams. Good night.